It's going well.
Okay, good. It's right at 6 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and start. I usually start off with a word of prayer. So
Sure.
I'll go there. Father, in the name of Jesus, we come to you in prayer tonight, and we're asking you, Lord, that you would just use this opportunity to enlighten us, Father, but not only enlighten us, to enlighten us with information and knowledge that we can use to be more successful in our scholastic endeavors, and to help us achieve what it is you've called us to achieve, Lord. But more importantly, Lord, help us to be able to love others more than we love ourselves, as we love you with the greatest love possible. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
All right. So this week, first, do you have any questions related to anything in the course from week 1, 2, or 3?
I guess I did have a question about the writing project assignment.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I've been busy all day, and I was trying to get to it, but then when I was trying to start the online session, for some reason Zoom was having problems, so I couldn't respond. But go ahead.
Oh yeah, that's no problem. I just was curious about the articles that the assignment wanted us to get that's mentioned about economic theories, and so I wasn't sure if like what we read about this week about like the corporations, consumers, and the environment, are those like the economic theories it's referring to?
It all depends on how you want to write your paper. It all depends on what angle you're taking. So
Okay.
if you determine that you want to take your the final paper in this particular direction, it may be some of those, all of those, or none of those.
Okay.
Yeah. So it all depends on what you want to do.
Okay, got you. Because I was kind of looking up economic theories, and then I came up some things like Friedman.
Friedman, yeah, Milton Friedman. He's probably the best economist to ever live. Great guy, great man. And I would encourage you, pay close attention to what he writes, because he's spot on with some of his information. Not only did he help the British government and the United States government, he won the Nobel Prize, so he knows what he's talking about.
Awesome. And that was my only question, just clarifying about economic theories.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll jump right into chapter 5 for this for week 3. In week 3, we're covering 3 different subjects. First, we're covering corporations, we're covering consumers, and we're covering the environment. Probably what you've seen in our course so far related to corporations is that corporations are modern creations. Under the common law, corporations didn't have the freedom and power that they have today. And basically, the modern business corporation has evolved over several centuries, and incorporation is no longer the special privilege that it once was. Mainly, incorporation protected companies from certain liabilities, and the main thing was that it protected their officers and shareholders from certain liability. And that's changed because so much fraud has been used with corporations that were listed as corporations, but were really dummy corporations to abuse a tax system, or to abuse investors, or just be downright vehicles of thievery and illegality. They just don't enjoy that same special privilege. So in the United States, in every state, corporations can incorporate. Basically, they're putting everyone on notice. Listen, if you have a problem with this company, it's going to be the company, not the people who formed it. And Delaware is really big for corporations because they're very friendly to the banking industry. You'll find that the vast majority of banks have been incorporated in Delaware because of the various laws that really protect them and make things nice for them. And basically, a corporation is a legal entity that has rights and responsibilities that are enjoyed by individuals. You may have heard about this Supreme Court case. It escapes me at the time, but basically it says that corporations can give unlimited amount of money to federal campaigns. Mm-hmm. And when Mitt Romney was running for president, there was a lot of consternation heaped on him when he declared that corporations are people. Well, that's basically true. Corporations can do the very things that they can do. They can sue, they can be sued. They can contract, they can sue on contracts. They can invest in the market, they can divest in the market. Basically, every right that people are given, corporations are given once they have been incorporated. And business corporation are limited liability companies. Basically, their owners or stockholders are liable for corporate debts only up to the extent of their investments. So if something is done wrong by the corporation, well, not everybody is going to be on the hook to the same degree. For instance, Amazon sells stocks, but Amazon doesn't sell enough stock so that Jeff Bezos could be unseated. So if Amazon was ever sued for something, Jeff Bezos would be the one that has the deeper pockets than anyone else. So that's generally the idea. You'd be listing Jeff Bezos versus Amazon rather than Jeff Bezos, Amazon, and the stockholders, because they know he has the deepest pockets of everybody. And the biggest question that comes up with corporations, since we're treating them like people, is the question of corporate moral agency. And that examines whether corporations are the kind of entity that have moral responsibilities. And we touch on this in our discussion when we talk about corporate social responsibility, CSR. And Milton Friedman, you mentioned earlier, was a champion, and I certainly agree with him on this, that corporate social responsibility for businesses should be to make money. Mm-hmm. Corporations in a capitalist system are designed to do one thing: make money, sell a product at the most efficient level to create as much profit as they possibly can. And if we encourage businesses to do that without telling them they have to spend exorbitant amount of money to appease populations, then they'll be more efficient at doing what they do. Well, there are other people that say, well, the corporations, they have a greater responsibility. They need to invest in a neighborhood. They need to invest in certain political ideas, political movements. But for a lot of businesses, they don't want to do that. And the best example was Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was criticized heavily when he played basketball because he just refused to criticize Republicans. Everyone thought he was a Democrat. And he just basically said, hey, Republicans buy shoes too. In other words, my job as this famous basketball star who's making a bunch of money is to do just that, play basketball and make money. Because with Nike, he was responsible for selling that brand. He had a brand and Nike had a brand. And it was well understood that the more he can maximize the profit, the more prestigious and more profitable the company would be. So when it comes to moral agency, you also have to ask about, well, whose morals are we using to determine whether or not Michael Jordan has to take a position on something? And philosophers disagree about whether the corporate decision-making process, including the decision-making process of leaders like Michael Jordan, make it reasonable to assign more responsibility to corporations. Because in a situation like Michael Jordan, does he really have a responsibility beyond playing basketball and making the best product possible? Really? That was the question that he threw back at the people who criticized him, and they really didn't have an answer for that. And ever since then, he's played it right down the middle of the road. And an example would be when the Michael Brown shooting went down in Ferguson, Missouri. He donated $1 million to Black Lives Matter, and he donated $1 million to the Fraternal Order Police. He was making clear, hey, I'm not taking sides because everybody buys shoes. Some corporations are comfortable with taking sides because they feel that they can get ahead, but then some corporations take no position at all. So with Michael Jordan, you see kind of a hybrid situation where he says, I'm not taking a position, but I will invest in both sides of the argument. And that is some of the, just an example of the corporate responsibility that the more quote unquote progressive side of this political spectrum believes should be done. Whereas Milton Friedman represents the more conservative side that says, if you get government out of the way, let businesses invest, become more efficient and create profit, that profit can be reinvested back into the communities by how? Creating jobs. Mm. But someone like a park, or do they want a job? Well, if they have a job, they can go choose a park where they want to go. They can go to a movie, they can pay a bill, etc. And that's how he viewed it. So the debate over corporate responsibility was whether it should be construed narrowly to cover only profit maximization, which I described as Milton arguing, or more broadly to include acting morally, which is a more progressive argument. Or you could also say, should they refrain from socially undesirable behavior and contribute actively and directly to the public good? Proponents of the Milton Friedman view without repeating myself, basically contend that diverting corporations from the pursuit of profit makes our economic system less efficient. Well, defenders of the broad view argue that corporations have additional responsibilities because of their great social and economic power. You may remember when Elizabeth Warren and Barack Obama were telling business owners, hey, you didn't build that business. In essence, they were saying because the government put the infrastructure there with national taxpayer money, well, then you owe something to the government, basically saying a communist theory, which is we have a right to control your business, which is not right, which is not proper in a capitalistic system. So business, according to them, is governed by an implicit social contract that requires it to operate to benefit society, not just its shareholders. So to them, corporations have to take responsibility for the unintended side effects of their business transactions. And we call those externalities. So it's not enough that a business is making enough money, but if in the production of their shoes for Michael Jordan, they're polluting a river, well, they have a responsibility to clean up the river and not just wait for the government to step in. Do you have any questions on any of that?
No, I didn't have any questions. Or I guess maybe a thought that I do see both sides of like the narrow-minded and broader-minded of corporations, but I guess the book kind of talks about it a little bit in a sense that, and maybe it's kind of getting ahead, but that it's almost as if the consumers or if the public kind of pressures corporations to get to be more, to pick a side on issues such as like the environment or even like women's rights or gender equality or even racial things. Like I've noticed a lot more corporations that seemingly don't really have anything to do with the issue, but kind of picking a side, especially like I've seen a lot of bank commercials talking about women having, equal pay and things like that, basically picking sides. And it almost kind of turned into almost kind of like a popularity kind of situation, like of corporations being pressured to pick a side so that they can keep consumers happy, so that consumers can buy from them.
One of the things that corporations, when they fall prey and give into certain pressures, they are doing what's called moating themselves. Moating themselves is basically saying that they're digging this deep ditch, filling it with tar, water, and everything else, and agreeing with the people with the pitchforks, so the people with the pitchforks won't try to cross that moat in order to get them. Right. And we see that right now with the open carry debate and gun control. A lot of corporations are saying, don't come into our organization openly carrying your firearm. But the problem is the people who are openly carrying them, they're not the ones committing the crimes. Right. They're not the ones out there they're the law-abiding citizens who are honoring the law, doing what they're supposed to do. We know a person who's hell-bent on raising hell and killing folks, that person is not going to follow the law by nature, by design. Right. So that's just an example of how businesses are pulled into this dynamic where they have to pick a side. And the people who argue that that we need to leave corporations alone to be more efficient argue that they shouldn't be made to pay a side because of the invisible hand. And basically the invisible hand is basically saying that at the end of the day, everything is going to work out the way it should. And then they also argue that the let government do it argument is basically a recipe for inefficiency because the government can't do anything as efficiently as it should. And then they also argue that the business can't handle that argument, basically rests on the idea that when it comes to these issues, that if a business, like you pointed out, if a business's job has nothing to do with women's rights, gun control, why are we going to make them get involved? Right. Because you're making them step inside something that really has nothing to do with the products they're selling. So, but the main counter argument to that is that there's no basis for restricting corporate responsibility to profit making. In other words, if we make them do more or encourage them to do more than just simply make profits, what does it hurt? Well, it hurts efficiency, and it makes them lose customers because someone's going to identify and say, hey, they don't like my position, so I'm going to take my dollars elsewhere. And because capitalism is inherently competitive, they're going to lose those dollars, and they just don't want it. They shouldn't have to make that choice when their main role is to make money. So those who are arguing against that basically argue that there's an ethical atmosphere within the corporation as the first step of the corporation. Basically, essential to the atmosphere is that they have to acknowledge the critical importance of ethics, encouraging more responsibility and conduct by all employees, and recognizing the pluralistic nature of our social system and being open to the public. So there's a lot more consideration, a lot more thought that goes into trying to defend the idea that corporations should be made, or at least strongly encouraged to do more than just simply make products. And according to people like Christopher Stone, who's also in the comments, he basically argues that corporations and the people who make them up must have high moral standards and monitor their own behavior, because really, who holds them accountable when they have not done anything illegal? Well, that's the nature of the market system. That's the nature of saying this corporation is doing something bad. So what people like Mr. Stone are arguing is that in order to ensure that we have socially and morally acceptable behavior, we need to have laws that we need to have more government control over businesses. We have to have a more socialist/communist model that takes away the rights of stockholders and officers and gives it more of a government mandate. Second, a criticism is that how many laws can you pass to take over these corporations? Because at some point, there's going to be issues that arise that you just haven't seen. So how's a corporation going to be told that you have to do this, X, Y, and Z, when they're dealing with issue A, B, or C? It's just impossible. And a final argument that they argue is that enforcing the laws and regulations are often too difficult. This goes back to what I was saying. If there's no law to enforce, what are corporations going to do? And that's why they're arguing that there needs to be a greater reliance on their moral thinking for corporation. But basically, when it comes to corporations, every corporation, as well as every economy, has to have two important things to work: trust and confidence. The adoption of realistic and a workable code of ethics in the business world can actually help or hinder efficiency. People have got to be able to trust the corporation and have confidence that the corporation is going to do one thing or another without coming across as the bad guy. Because if they're trying to make money, the main issue is they want to do something that draws in the most dollars for those stakeholders, for those stockholders. And if they don't, they're going to end up ultimately losing money. And that's a greater problem in itself. So when it comes to corporate social responsibility, you have a corporate responsibility, but that you also have an individual responsibility. And it's up to the corporation to set the tone for their corporate social responsibility programs. If their focus is going to be just making money, well, then they need to tell people that, hey, we're not interested in saving the whales. We're not interested in whether Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. We just want us to make a profit for our people by making the best product available. And they need to make that up front. But the long and short of it, of corporations, is that they are treated like people. And like people, they are given to these political inclinations that could hurt or harm them. And that's really something that we have to take into account when we're looking at ethics. You know, whose ethics are we going to follow? So you have any questions about the Chapter 5 in corporate social responsibility?
I guess I had another question, kind of thought. When it's talking about kind of like picking sides or doing more than just making a profit, would you say that that's kind of the same thing that goes for, say, like Christian organizations? Like,
now, how so would you argue that?
I guess because, so I guess like in the thought of like religion being kind of, well, like especially like in America where there isn't no one religion, there's no, and that I guess like if you have a corporation that is at the forefront Christian and kind of, I guess, talks about Christian values, but also tries to make a profit, wouldn't you say that, like, I guess that corporation or that company also runs that same risk of losing money or doing more than just making a profit?
Well, like the secular corporations, the problem isn't the profit. The problem is how they make the profit.
Gotcha.
If they're hoodwinking and bamboozling customers to make their profit, well, then they're acting no different than the secular corporations. But if they're saying, listen, we have a certain way that we operate, and we're going to operate in this way. And if you want to be a part of this franchise, you're going to operate in this way too. And they make that clear, and they say, listen, our guiding principles are those found in God's holy word, the Holy Bible, and that's how we operate. They're putting the world on notice that when it comes to their business model, it's not just going to have a aspect of profit making. It's going to have an aspect of profit making that directly relates to its core values of belief, which is the Bible. So they run the same risk as other corporations insofar as that by determining how they will operate, that will determine whether or not they are seen as secular corporations.
Okay.
All right. And related to that is how corporations deal with today's consumers. And one of the things that corporations have to be aware is that consumers, and we kind of touched on this, consumers are willing to take their dollars elsewhere. So basically the complexity of today's economy and the dependence of consumers on business increase businesses' responsibility for product safety. You know, buyers depend on the usual expertise of sellers to assess the quality of products. Because not everybody can be an expert on everything. So that's where we go back to the idea of trust and confidence. But even with all of the protections afforded to corporations, there still can be legal liability under the torts laws through negligence, through products liability, and under strict liability. The idea that if you are engaging in a course of conduct and you don't do it properly, or you intentionally do it recklessly, or you engage in it, and we've already determined that particular conduct was inherently dangerous, well, there are going to be repercussions for that. So, so the main idea behind the consumer part is that once they have this trust and confidence, well, it goes hand in hand that the corporation must not only honor that trust and confidence, they do that by not just having corporate socially responsible policies, but by manufacturing the best product they can. And all the safety and all the products that corporations make, we know they're safe because of government entities such as the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They have large authority in determining what's safe and not, and we call that legal paternalism. Well, we've given the power of the government, we've given government the power to act like a father to protect society from unscrupulous businesses selling garbage and running scams that hurt the public. So although there are exceptions, regulations generally help ensure that businesses meet their responsibilities. Regulation can be good, but over-regulation is a big problem in government. And business people tend to favor self-regulation over government regulation. Because at the end of the day, the government's going to make you spend more money if you're corporate. That's just the long and short of it. That's just the truth. The government, in passing rules through various agencies, are going to cause these corporations to have to spend more money and increase their efforts to be socially responsible. But businesses also have other obligations to consumers. We talked about product quality, but we also have to be fair in their pricing. They should also engage from price fixing. They should price gouging and price manipulation. In other words, they can't use improper methods to artificially alter the market for their products at the expense of consumers. And we see that like in hurricanes. In places where there could be hurricanes, you see there's always a concern about price gouging because they're using a problem within the market to take advantage of people. And by the same token, advertising is also examined by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, because if advertising is trying to do more than what we call puff, then we get to the point where lying is acceptable in advertising, and they don't want to do that. So the Federal Trade Commission seeks to go after those corporations that use deceptive advertising. And they also go after corporations that use unfair tactics. And the true legal term is an unfair and deceptive trade practice. And the FTC goes after those corporations because they're the legal paternalism. They're trying to protect society from these from corporations that have just more power, that just have more power than they do. And so the main idea behind the consumer protections and the government acting as a legally paternal entity is that they're just trying to protect the public. While there are some stupid laws out there, stupid regulations, at the end of the day, many regulations do in fact protect corporations. They protect the public. They keep things safe. So overall, when it comes to consumers trust and confidence is rooted in two different places: in the corporation and in the government. That just can't escape that if you're in a capitalist system, if you're trying to make a system safe. Because in a capitalist system, other than the market, there are no checks and balances to determine whether or not you want to end a particular practice. So did you have any questions on consumers and how they relate?
I guess like with when it came to like the pricing, I noticed that, and not fixing, but when pricing where it's just for psychological measures, like to say something's $9.99 instead of $10, things like that. Is that not also in a way deceptive to consumers, like to kind of using psychology and using kind of sciences I guess for corporations or even government to kind of, in a way, manipulate consumers, especially like when it comes to pricing?
Well, there's a spectrum from complete honest advertising to completely false advertising. And all the things you mentioned are on along that spectrum. And as we get closer to completely dishonest, well, then those methods are going to be frowned upon. So when we're dealing with psychological advertising and marketing, then that's going to be on that spectrum. And the FTC has said, as long as they aren't lying, using things like $10.99 as opposed to $11, if that makes people feel like they're spending less money, well, then that's fine because they're telling the truth. The product is $10.99. They have no control whether or not a person's emotional or psychological reaction is going to be one way or another. That's just not something they're called to do. And by the same token, when it comes to regulation of environmental policy, corporations face the same issues. They have to deal with a balancing act between being a member of the environment, using the environment, but making certain that they protect the environment to a certain degree. And pollution control in any industry is going to have a price. It just will. These corporations are going to have to spend the money to comply with government regulations. So therefore, trade-offs must be made. But weighing costs and benefits involve controversial factual assessments and value judgments. They have to determine what's more important to us, 10 acres of farmland or 3 acres of land where a spotted endangered owl is. And that's where the EPA gets involved, and then they have to decide, what are we going to let them do? Are we going to protect this spotted owl, or are we going to let them take 10 acres of farmland? So when it comes to the environmental ethics, those who argue for a bigger role basically argue that there are obligations that corporations have to society and to future generations. In other words, leave something in a better position than when you received it if you're a corporation. Don't use all the resources. Remember, someone has to come after you down the line. And when we look at what philosophers have talked about in terms of this, basically they argue that adopting a human-oriented point of view is problematic because the environment is valuable only because human beings value it. So if you say people are the problem, well, guess what? You're now saying that the environment is a commodity to be used by anybody without control, whether it's people, whether it's animals, etc. So you have to say, you have to allow people to place some value on it so that there won't be this widespread willy-nilly misuse and gross waste of the environment. And that's basically the main idea when we're talking about environmental regulations and the things that we're talking about this week in the course. So those are basically all the things that I intended to cover, because those are the heart and the meat and potatoes of the week 3. So do you have any questions on week 3 on any of these subjects or any other ideas that you want to discuss while we're here?
No, I didn't have any questions.
Okay, all right. I would, if you haven't already done so, I just want to quickly remind you to make certain that you get your initial discussion posts in. They're due by Friday. Also be sure to respond. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I know you send messages through the Sakai system, but I can't respond to those from my phone as quickly as I can if you just simply email me.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you email me, I can just respond immediately. But with Sakai, I have to go into Sakai and then type out the response, and that's a little bit more cumbersome. But you may choose either one, which is best for you. You know, I'm just telling you which one that just makes it easier, just make it more efficient. But either one is fine in the long run. If you have any other questions about the assignments this week, please let me know. If you have any issues related to your thesis, trying to come up with an idea for the paper, let me know. I'll be more than happy to help you there. And that's about it for this week.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Again, reach out to me if you need anything, all right?
Will do. You have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye.